Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Kerala State Planning Board and the Government of Kerala, I welcome you to the concluding session at Kerala Looks Ahead, an international conference and consultation. I invite Professor V.K. Ramachandran, Vice Chairperson, Kerala State Planning Board, to give the welcome address.
Thank you, Ardra. Welcome to this concluding session of the International Conference and Consultation titled Kerala Looks Ahead. As I have had occasion to say over these last few days, when this government came to office in 2016, it was committed to a policy of planned development and to a policy of economic development that bore the ancestry of the policies that have made Kerala well known in the national and international arenas. The government decided that it would continue with the process of economic planning. It also decided that it would deepen and extend our achievements in human development, in social justice, in gender empowerment, and in health and school education, but that it would use the strengths thus built to catapult itself, to catapult the state into a new stage of development, to strengthen our productive capacities, to strengthen our employment, particularly for our youth, to strengthen physical infrastructure, and to improve income-bearing services in the state. 4 years and a half later, we have made substantial achievements, and these have been made despite the setbacks that we have suffered in terms of natural calamities. We had Cyclone Oki, we had the extreme rainfall events of 2018 and 19. We've had a 2-district epidemic of Nipah. We've had the corona pandemic. And then we've also had economic setbacks from demonetization and other phenomena. Nevertheless, we believe that over this period we have made substantial achievements. The most enduring contribution, the lasting legacy of this government, I believe, is that today, in development terms, Kerala is on the move. And Kerala has now established, because of new achievements in agriculture, services and industry, Kerala is now poised for a new leap into a new economic future. If it is in this context that the Chief Minister, Shri Pinarayi Vijayan, instructed the Planning Board some months ago, and he is the chairperson of the Planning Board, to organize an international conference and consultation on the ways forward for the state. As I have said earlier, the objective of this conference is not to teach the world or to tell the world of our achievements, but to learn. And to learn about the best practices and achievements all over the world and their relevance to Kerala in a diversity of fields. Now, these fields were discussed and recommended by the Chief Minister to us, and they are the following. One was modernizing agriculture, fisheries, and animal resources. The second was information technology. The third was e-governance. The fourth was modern skill development. The fifth was modern industrial possibilities. We then had tourism, higher education. Yeah, these were the areas in which we had sessions. We had sessions also in two other areas. One was on development finance, looking at Kerala's contributions in this field, and on local governments, again looking at Kerala's contributions in this field and learning from the world, again on best practices. Altogether, when we planned this ambitiously, but we were unprepared for the extraordinary response to our effort. We are humbled by it, and we have had now about, if we count the pre-conference and all the conference sessions, we have had about 22 sessions over these 9 themes. We've had 3 special sessions on local government, on development finance and fiscal federalism, and a special industry session attended by India's most eminent industrialists. We have had an extraordinary response, not only in Zoom, but in our other platforms as well. The discussions and the quality of the contributions have been extraordinary. We are indeed very grateful to the speakers, participants, discussants, and those who joined us from the floor for giving us a whole new set of ideas and stimuli, and for recommending a series of changes, of methods that can be used by us in charting a path to a modern progressive Kerala. Let me now not come between you and the speakers, but we have, at the end of these sessions, we have requested one of the leading persons from each session to summarize, to the extent possible, the proceedings of that session. Now, this is it's necessarily a very difficult and tricky task, because the sessions were so rich that it is difficult to summarize their main points and the main points that came up in 10 minutes. But nevertheless, we should try, and I know that my colleagues who will make the presentations will collectively give us a flavor of the exciting 3 days that we have spent in this consultation and conference. May I request that we begin the program of summaries of the sessions that we have had. Thank you very much. And thank you all of those who are joining us on Zoom and all platforms, for the support that you have given us over these 2 days.
Thank you, Professor Ramachandran. We are getting started with the presentation of summaries from the 9 thematic sessions as mentioned by Professor. These are the sessions that were held yesterday on day 2 at Kerala Looks Ahead. To get started, we have a summary of session on modernizing agriculture, fisheries and animal resources being presented by Professor R. Ramkumar, member of Kerala State Planning Board.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairperson. The task of organizing sessions on agriculture, animal husbandry and fisheries over a short period of 1 day was a very difficult task for all of us. That required us to focus on 1 or 2 major ideas in each theme and not more than that. And for agriculture, animal husbandry and fisheries, and particularly in animal husbandry and agriculture, what we chose was the need to increase productivity in those sectors. It is clear, let me start with agriculture, that is crop production. It is clear that Kerala has to focus on a rapid increase in production of its major crops over the next 5 years or 10 years. Given that more area cannot be brought under cultivation, focus has to be to raise productivity. Rise in productivity requires a serious reliance on modern agricultural science and a firm rejection of traditionalist methods that keep productivity levels low while at the same time with no concomitant benefits to the environment. One of the important weaknesses of agriculture in Kerala is the low productivity of most of its major crops. Productivity levels are low, both in comparison with other states, as well as with the maximum attainable productivity under scientific conditions, which is what we call as the yield gap. Productivity levels of many crops in Kerala have also declined if you see the period between 2011-12 and 2019-20. Of course, natural disasters and all have played a very important part, but the primary task of agricultural policy, nevertheless, over the next decade or so, has to be a focused program to raise crop productivity. Only if productivity improves can incomes be raised. Studies show, and this was reported by many scholars in the pre-conference sessions as well as in the conference sessions, rain-fed regions of Kerala, they see yield gaps can be closed with the existing technologies itself. Policy, and in particular the extension machinery, has to focus on better management of soil and water, wider adoption of improved varieties, availability of good quality certified seeds, balanced fertilization, and balanced nutrient management. These presentations also showed that higher yield gaps are broadly correlated with poor adoption of technologies. For instance, the absence of or poor application of lime, chemical fertilizers, insecticides, and fungicides was found to be common in regions and crops with higher yield gaps. The more recent introduction of planning for agroecological zones by the Agriculture Department is a welcome step. We hope that this will ultimately lead to improved and scientific formulation, design, and implementation of schemes of the department. It is only through application of more and better science that agriculture can become sustainable. In Kerala, often a common understanding propagated through sections of the media and unverified sources is that zero application of fertilizers and pesticides is the singular way to attain sustainability. Nothing, as many presenters repeatedly underlined, nothing can be more wrong and irrational. We have already seen that the consumption of fertilizers on a per hectare basis is the lowest in Kerala compared to all Indian states, and it has declined drastically, in fact, dangerously over the last decade. This is something that many speakers in the agricultural session tried to focus on, and they insisted that this should receive immediate attention. Kerala's consumption of NPK fertilizers was 36 kg per hectare, which was the lowest among Indian states. Corresponding figures are 186 kg per hectare in Tamil Nadu, for example. That's a kind of difference that you see. The implications of this decline in fertilizer consumption in the soil for the sustenance of soil health also has not been adequately studied. Agronomists made it a point to underline this particular point. Globally, experiences show that reduced application of chemicals in agriculture can be achieved only through better research in the breeding of new crop varieties resistant to pests and diseases. Only if you have such new varieties and hybrids can you think of a long-term policy or a sustainable policy of reducing application of chemicals in agriculture. Advanced research in plant breeding should help us to develop varieties and hybrids that are systemically requiring less application of chemicals. New applications of cutting-edge areas of research such as biotechnology, gene editing, CRISPR, and nanotechnology promise not just to reduce the use of chemicals, but also make high-yielding crop varieties resistant to viral diseases, acidity, alkalinity, salinity, flooding, and temperature variations. The state's agricultural research system needs to be geared up to meet this challenge. These were very important questions discussed, where one particular session discussed three particular instances of this new technology introductions. Nanotechnology, where introduction of nanodiagnostics, nano-agri inputs, like the small tablets of fertilizer, pesticides, and bioinoculants can be used. Nano stickers, nano pellets, nano films that help in fruit preservation, to help extend shelf life of fruits and vegetables by 6 weeks. And that be highly favoring export orientation, long-term transport possibilities, and preservation and storage during times of glut in the market. So nanotechnology was, in fact, that session was a big hit among the 200 odd participants in the Zoom room, and many wanted to pursue that task much more intensively in the Kerala context. Gene editing and CRISPR. Professor Catherine Heffron from the Cornell University spoke in extensive detail about this. She pointed out that this is a highly accurate, fast, and low-cost technology compared to the present focus on GM crops. Stimulation of growth, manipulation of flowering time, stimulation of sucrose, increased uptake and transport of nutrients within the plant system, pest resistance, herbicide tolerance, photosynthetic ability, resistance to temperature stress, drought resistance, tolerance to salinity, changing fruit, grain, size, shape, number, etc. All these are multifarious possibilities that have been opened up by the gene editing technologies. Kerala should be able to use these technologies, having an early start in research and dissemination. Other technologies, as the ICR Director General pointed out, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence platforms, precision agriculture also were discussed in great detail in the context of Kerala's agricultural growth. Changes in production organization were also focused on. We have to learn from, as Professor Sukhpal Singh from IIM Ahmedabad pointed out, we have to learn from Thailand in how to use contract farming towards state-regulated, farmer-centric approach to agricultural growth, how to leverage contract farming to ensure economies of scale, how to ensure the role of the state in coordination, support, provision of institutional, physical, and infrastructural support, providing tax relaxations, providing incentives, etc., to farmer groups, collectives, cooperatives, etc. That's the way, and not the path laid out by the 3 Farm Acts of the central government. That should be the way, an alternative path of contract farming ahead. That was pointed out from drawing from the Thailand example by Professor Sukhpal Singh. Now, if this is in production and immediate sales, we also need larger cooperative network building in the retail marketing sector. There was excellent presentation from Switzerland where 3 cooperatives were discussed. FENACO, the biggest agricultural cooperative in Switzerland, as also Coop and Migros. Talking of FENACO, for example, government provided subsidies for quality products for over 20 years now, has been providing. 80 companies are there belonging to FENACO. They're engaged in retail, energy, food, agribusiness, linking about 45,000 farmers in Switzerland to the market, providing higher price to the farmers at very low margins. And they're one of the leaders in Swiss fruit markets, for example. So these examples were case studies, were discussed in great detail, which have major implications for policy adoption in Kerala. The third item that was discussed in crop production was value addition, where there was an excellent presentation by the Tropicana Oil Company executives in Thailand, which produces different products of coconut and exports it to 20 countries. The pathways to an export-oriented path in value addition and processing in coconut products was discussed there. There were also discussions on the possibilities of processing in rubber, and also, very importantly, something that Kerala has already begun, the Araku model of coffee transformation in Wayanad, where farmers are aggregated into a collective for certified production, traceability, and marketing advantage. Diversified shade coffee landscape is promoted with multiple income sources for climate change resilience. There is selective quality harvesting, professional procurement, and primary processing of coffee cherries. All these were lessons from the Araku Valley model of coffee farming that were suggested for Kerala, and Kerala has already started steps in this direction. Moving to animal husbandry, one of the most important features of dairy production in Kerala over the last 4 years has been that Kerala has moved very close to self-sufficiency in milk production. We used to import something like 9 lakh liters of milk on a daily basis in 2015 and 16. We today import only about 3 lakh liters of milk. We are very close to food self-sufficiency in dairy in milk production. Soon, by 23 or 24, we are likely to reach a surplus state in milk production. What is to be done with the surplus? What is to be? How should Kerala be prepared for an era of surplus milk production? What are the possibilities of diversification, value addition that we need to be ready for? Establishment of milk powder factories, for example, evaporator plants. How should Kerala be ready? the Amul chief, Dr. R. Sodhi, advocated a new program of Operation Flood Kerala, which should hasten the process of achieving self-sufficiency in milk production. He underlined the need for expanding the average herd size in cattle farms of dairy farms of Kerala today to at least 60 in number per farm, which will greatly allow you to expand employment possibilities as well as increase incomes in the sector. How do we do that? We have to intensify our use of dairy cooperatives, where we are already a leader at the All India level. About 25% of milk produced in Kerala is already procured by cooperatives. We need to raise it to 40%, 50%. That's the path ahead. But how? Using technology induction, a digital platform for cooperatives, automated milk collection possibilities, genetic improvement of the of the cattle population, insurance, value addition, diversification of products, introduction of premium products, ensuring credit, etc. These were the components of a new Operation Flood Kerala, laid out in these sessions. Focus was also on the need to develop a sector where Kerala has immense advantages, immense potential, but it is hugely underdeveloped, which is the meat sector, poultry, chicken and eggs, beef, piggery, etc. The need for more slaughterhouses was underlined. The need to modernize and convert the currently unhygienic slaughterhouses into hygienic slaughterhouses was advocated. There was a need for branding Kerala's meat products, need for export orientation, particularly into the Middle Eastern regions. All these were possibilities that were underlined in the session on meat sector in Kerala. In piggery, one particular sector discussed a lot. We can be the leaders, it was argued. But at the same time, we are underdeveloped in its potential. We need something like 300,000 pigs, but we have only 60,000 pigs. But we don't have at the same time a breeding policy or an artificial insemination policy. We need compulsory vaccination of our pigs. Our slaughterhouses are unhygienic. We need investments in waste disposal, rendering plants, composting units, etc. And there's also huge scope for development of micro-entrepreneurship in piggery. That was underlined by many speakers. Coming to the last session that I want to speak about, which is the session on fisheries. The major focus, the most important focus of the planning board that has been over the last 4 years and which was advocated in these sessions was to focus on the development of inland aquaculture. Kerala's potential for development of inland aquaculture in the increase of rural incomes, in the expansion of rural employment was repeatedly underlined by many of the speakers. But Kerala has a lot of disadvantages as well. It doesn't have a focused policy as yet to expand inland aquaculture. Fish seed production is very inadequate. We have only about 5 crore seeds in production as against the requirement of about 12 crore fish seeds. That means we have a deficit of about 7 crore fish seeds. Great possibilities of employment expansion exist here in when you grow this sector. The session from Andhra Pradesh, drawing from the experiences of Andhra Pradesh in value chain development in fisheries, showed that extraordinary employment possibilities exist in the development of hatcheries, nurseries, seed trade, pelleted seed trade, small boats, fish trade, ice factory, mechanical excavator, trucks for hire. So there are multiple linkage effects that this fisheries growth will create in the economy with concomitant expansions in employment, particularly for women. Need for clusters. That was something that was underlined, identifying farm and business clusters in fisheries and supporting their development with incentives, subsidies, etc. Along with all these possibilities, some cautionary notes were also made, particularly with respect to regulation and environmental implications of rapid fisheries expansion. Rapid and unplanned development of fisheries can sometimes cause conflicts and environmental difficulties. Yet another point that was made was that planning that is too stringent can be restrictive and often ineffective. So you need a balance between what is to be regulated and how much is to be regulated. There is a need to strike a balance. Experts underlined that point as well with great importance. Possibilities of coastal aquaculture, mariculture, reservoir fishing, cage culture, ornamental fisheries. All these were possibilities laid out for Kerala, given Kerala's large presence of ponds, small water bodies, etc., which can be used used extensively and intensively to increase fisheries production in the state. This is a short summary. This summary is inadequate to capture the richness of the discussions that were held over the pre-conference sessions and the conference sessions. But I have only 15 minutes and I need to stop now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for that glimpse capturing all the insights from yesterday in that particular session. And for the next session summary, I'd like to invite Dr. Jain Jose Thomas, member Kerala State Planning Board. He'll be reporting on modern industrial possibilities.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Friends, we have had 2 sessions on industry. There was a session yesterday on modern industrial possibilities. And today we had a meeting with the leaders of Indian industry. So I would like to report the main findings from the 2 discussions. One major point that came up in the discussions is that we should plan for the future of Kerala's industry, taking into account the unique strengths as well as challenges that Kerala face. So it's very clear for Kerala, cheapness of land or labor is not one of Kerala's strengths. So in that way, it is also difficult to compare Kerala with many other states, as is often done in the ease of doing business comparisons. Kerala's unique strengths, it was emphasized by each of the discussants, are one, in skilled labor. We have professionals, nurses, doctors, engineers working all over the world, 1.4 million as per the estimate in 2011. So we have skilled labor. Second is natural resources. The kind of agricultural products that we produce, our rich marine resources, our forest wealth. And third, of course, is the large domestic market that Kerala has, which actually offers a very mature and diversified market for a range of industrial products, consumer goods, food products, and so on. So given these advantages, it's quite, in fact, many of the discussants pointed out that Kerala is in fact ahead of other states when it comes to technologically advanced industries. Industries which are sometimes referred to as Industry 4.0. Also, the other trend is to go for industries and technologies which are more environmentally and ecologically friendly. So green technologies. So again, here Kerala has an edge over other regions in the country. One theme that has appeared in almost all the discussions that we have had over the 2 days was the importance of technology and value addition. So the way to transform Kerala, the way to build an industrial sector, an industrial growth which is inclusive and ecologically sustainable, the way to do this is to emphasize on technology and value addition. Before we move into further details on the way forward, a few things need to be clarified, and these were points that came up in the discussions. One is a myth that Kerala is not advancing fast enough when it comes to industry. In fact, in the discussions, it was pointed out that this is just a myth. Kerala is actually, according to many of the discussants, one of the most exciting places for industrial growth as of now. In fact, this is also showing up in the official statistics. Our per capita income is almost 60% higher than the national average, and it's also growing faster than the national average. The share of manufacturing in Kerala's GSDP, gross state domestic product, has increased from around 9% in the early 2000s to 13 to 14% now. The very interesting and remarkable thing about Kerala's industrial growth, in fact, over the last 3 decades or so, is the emergence of relatively small and medium enterprises. Enterprises that are innovative, that that work on new technologies, new industries. Think of medical equipment, blood bags, dental instruments, electronic components. So these are some of the industries that have grown very fast over the last, in fact, three decades. If you look at the official statistics again, if the non-agricultural establishments, Kerala has a share of almost 6% in the country, much higher than Kerala's share in India's population. It's not just the small and medium industries that Kerala is doing very well in. We have another set of what may be described as the anchor industries. We have chemicals and petrochemicals. In fact, Kerala's industrialization began with chemicals. But we also have two major ports and a number of minor ports. And the latest economic survey, it's very, very important to note here, the latest economic survey released only 2 days back, according to this survey, Kochi is the most efficient port in the country now. We have, in fact, Kochi is going to benefit from the large expansion of BPCL, Kochi refineries, which actually opens up opportunities for the petrochemical industry. And the state government is setting up a petrochemical complex in Kochi, which will provide opportunities for the private sector players to start industries in a number of petrochemicals, paint, in a number of industries that are linked to chemicals and petrochemicals. Building on the Kerala's success in the health industry, health sector, the state is also planning to build a pharma park in Kochi. Another point to note here, and this came up in the discussions, is that while land is not one of Kerala's big advantages, but over the last few years, there's been a large increase in the availability of land for industrial purposes. Our industries department as well as our institutions, KSIDC and KINFRA, have set up a number of food parks, a number of industrial parks across the state. And as a result, in fact, one of the discussants pointed out yesterday that Kerala doesn't really have a disadvantage when it comes to the cost of land. So that was another feature that came up. Now, second set of industries, which we mentioned the anchor industries, the large expansion in petrochemicals, also the industrial corridor which is coming up, connecting Kochi and Coimbatore, along with a number of other infrastructure projects which are coming up. But the second set of industries in which Kerala has a big advantage are food and agro-processing industries, textiles and garments. These are industries which have traditionally employed a very large part of Kerala's industrial workforce. Also, these are industries which can gain hugely from the large domestic market within the state. One point which came up in the discussions is how small and medium enterprises can do very well in this sector, because this is a sector where our consumption is very high. Consumption within the state itself is very high. And of course, there is Kerala's industries can also look for markets outside the state and outside the country. But even within the state, there is a huge market possibilities. How to make use of that? So one suggestion which came up from some of the commentators is how government should help hand-holding assistance by the government when it comes to small and medium enterprises. And this can be mainly in the form of assistance in technology, assistance in marketing. An example that was brought up in the discussion, Kerala produces 8.4 billion coconuts every year, which is almost 35% of the national production, which means a huge possibility for Kerala in the soft drink business. And of course, this is a time when coconut's value, health benefits have been widely recognized across the world. But what is missing there again is assistance for continuous innovations by the small and medium enterprises, because in a for this example, in soft drinks, firms have to continuously respond to customers' changing tastes and preferences and so on. The third main area where Kerala has a big advantage is the knowledge industries, which includes electronics, biotechnology, life sciences, and a range of other new innovative industries. Kerala is already doing well in this. It's well known that startups in Kerala have been doing quite well over the recent years. It must also be mentioned that we are one of the first entrants in this sector. Keltron was established in 1973. Was the first agency, perhaps not just in India but even across the developing world, first agency for the development of electronics. So we can really build on this. And in fact, one advantage now Kerala has, and especially in the post-COVID era, is the remote working possibilities and knowledge workers who have digital skills. They can work across the length and breadth of Kerala. And this is one industry which can be spatially distributed across the state. Some of the points which came up in the discussion was that while we do have these advantages, very clear, we also really need to search for talent. We need to really hunt for more talent, more entrepreneurs, more knowledge workers, more professionals to come and work in Kerala. And that requires changes at every level. We probably need to create more spaces for work closer to home, remote working possibilities. It also might mean, of course, living standards in Kerala are very high, but probably we also need to make improvements when it comes to living conditions for younger workers. The final and a very important point that came up was the role of industrial policy. And we had a very important discussion from South Korea in this. It's notable that across the East Asian countries and South Korea in particular, the government played a key role in shaping industrial policies. It's not the market. It's not market as often believed, but the state has played a very important role. And in fact, the speaker mentioned how smart industrial policy in South Korea, coming up during this period, when it comes to knowledge industries, how South Korea has been promoting these new technologies. Kerala has much to learn on this. And one area where Kerala can really go forward is, industrial promotion, which also kind of combines the strengths of university, industry, and government. The triple helix interactions, which is often described in the innovation literature. So we had discussions on how academic institutions, universities and research institutes in Kerala can play a big role in taking the state forward when it comes to knowledge industries. In fact, there should be changes both from the industry as well as in the university system, where universities, there should be greater incentive for researchers and professors and students to take up industry relevant projects and also to start startups and so on. So these are some of the main points that came up in the discussions. I think this has been a really good 2 days of discussions on the future for Kerala's industry, how we can build an industrial sector, how industrial growth which is inclusive, ecologically sustainable, and above all, driven by innovation and new technologies. So I think I will end here. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for that summary on modern industrial possibilities. That was Dr. Jayan Jose Thomas. We now move on to the summary of session on information technology being presented by Professor T. Jayaraman, member of Kerala State Planning Board.
Good afternoon, Vice Chairperson and participants in the concluding session. I have a presentation. I hope we will be we will be able to successfully uh, share this. Yes. Uh, okay. We had a very productive session on information technology, and what I am able to present to you here on this occasion will be, for obvious reasons, a brief summary of a very intense and rich discussion. So we had the benefit of a very active partnership with the Kerala University of Digital Sciences, Innovation and Technology through Dr. Saji Gopinath in person, the Vice Chancellor, with the ICT Academy of Kerala, with the CEO, Mr. Santosh Kurup in person, with the CEO of the Kerala State IT Infrastructure Limited, Dr. Jaishankar Prasad, the CEO of Technopark, Mr. P.M. Sashi, and last but not least, the Additional Secretary, Mr. Mohammad Safirullah of the Department of Electronics and Information Technology of the Government of Kerala. So with these partners, we had I'm afraid you'll bear with me. I have to go back because of a brief uh, glitch. Yes. Uh, I'm afraid. Yes. We had three sessions, as I said earlier, a thematic session each on software and hardware. These were every bit as intense as the final session, which was held yesterday. The general format, we had panelists and presentations, panel discussions, very active question and answer session, and general discussions. With thanks to the real efforts of our partner institutions, we had experts drawn from all over the world, if I may say so, uh, consisting mainly of global, national, and regional business leaders and academics, typically with very particular and specialized knowledge also of Kerala, apart from their experience in the field of information technology. The sessions were marked by, I must point this out very particularly, by very constructive, engaged, and spirited contributions and discussions. And perhaps what I say later will give some idea of why I emphasize this. Here, of course, is where we stand in Kerala today in terms of information technology. We are not speaking today as if we are on a blank slate. We have four ways in which we have already a basis for moving ahead. So, since much of this is familiar, we will not proceed with this, though this was a very important part of the background to our discussion and was acknowledged very actively by the participants. We also have a network of infrastructure and institutions for moving ahead in information technology, and this also stands us in good stead for the future. So, what about the road ahead? And what is the future of IT, and what is the future in information technology as a sector? Now, this was pointed out very firmly by many, particularly by Mr. Shibulal, one of the co-founders of Infosys, that IT is one of the few sectors that continue to move ahead steadily during the pandemic. That does not mean, of course, that individual firms or individual subsectors have not had serious issues, but nevertheless, the sector as a whole continued to move ahead. And we are more and more witness to the all-encompassing role of IT. It was emphasized by Mr. Shibulal and several others that digitization will continue and indeed will accelerate. As one expert pointed out, what we have seen is incomparable to what is to come. For lack of time, I will not present a complete list that he produced of why he makes this observation. The other point also emphasized was that barriers to digitization in different sectors will drop further as a consequence of recent experiences, as of course due to the overall trend. But there are important shifts in the way the business is thought of. So it's no longer about IT services. It's no longer about single products, but the real focus increasingly is to IT solutions. Very often one thinks of it in an integrated fashion, and very often firms and enterprises that provide solutions are trying to position themselves successfully as one-stop solution. And this is an important thing to bear in mind. As far as strategy is concerned, it's not, it was emphasized quite seriously why it should not be about catching up. Catching up means that you have to chase leaders who may be far ahead, but one must leapfrog where possible. Looking ahead has another dimension. It's not simply satisfying customers and clients, though of course that will be important in the short run. But indeed, one should ask what your future client, customer or client should be. And with that in mind, how do you design what you are going to do? When talking of the IT sector in Kerala, it's well known, but it was the subject of serious discussion, that our major gaps are in the hardware ecosystem. We need to pay serious attention to basic infrastructure facilities in hardware. A major lacuna, a real weakness, is the absence of common testing infrastructure. The burden need not be entirely that of the government. PPP models are possible. There are players who are ready. Kerala lacks even an adequate level of printed circuit board manufacturing facilities. The real very basis of the whole thing. For example, dual-side multi-layer PCBs were mentioned. To go ahead in hardware, we need a clear policy and facilities for handling e-waste. Big players in the field who you may seek to attract need clarity on access to alternate energy sources. Launching hardware parks and sustaining them is an important challenge. Of course, there are many sectors, and several were mentioned: medical electronics, electric vehicles. The two of them are already, we have some foot in this direction. But of course, the other possibilities exist in solar energy, the grid connectivity of renewable energy, power electronics, and there are several others, many
We are losing you. We are losing you, Jayaraman.
Huh? It's a technical issue.
Sir, your voice is breaking. We're not able to hear you properly.
Change the slide where necessary.
And
We are getting a message that the bandwidth is low at Professor T. Jayaraman's end. So we are quickly moving on to the next summary on e-governance. We will return to Professor T. Jayaraman when the technical difficulty is resolved. For now, the summary of session on e-governance by Dr. Amit Prakash, Associate Professor, Center for IT and Public Policy, International Institute of Information Technology, Bengaluru.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be involved with this conference. The entire planning, where the Deputy Chairman was himself involved, and all his colleagues at the State Planning Board. I'd like to share my screen. Yes. I believe the screen is visible and my voice is clear. Thank you. Just as we had summary of other sessions, we had very extensive discussions during the 3 sessions on e-governance that were conducted yesterday, and I'll try to present a summary over the next 8 to 10 minutes. So, just to set a background, e-governance has traditionally not been a very clear-cut sector as agriculture or industries has been, and it has been spanning disciplines, it has been spanning sectors, and that is something that was evident in the kind of discussions we have had over the 3 sessions on e-governance. If we look at how e-governance has evolved over the last 30 odd years, and when we're looking at e-governance, we are broadly concerned with the design and use of information and communication technologies, or now digital technologies as they're more widely known by, for better governance outcomes. So we have always been concerned with this intersection of technology and governance in matters related to e-governance. It has evolved from single function process automation. So some of you may remember it was largely restricted to, say, payrolls or single function automations, static department websites, to inter-organizational and real-time citizen-facing systems. So now we have very elaborate and extensive systems on a national and state scale, like the one we use for managing our Employment Guarantee Act, the one we use for, say, biometric-enabled public distribution system, etc. So these are much evolved, they are much more complex than what e-governance applications were earlier. In general, e-governance has been seen as contributing to efficient departmental operations and faster turnaround times for citizen services. So we see, for example, property registration documents getting returned to the parties in 30 minutes, etc., from the 2 months, 3 months that were there earlier. Now, having said that, what we are experiencing today, based on a lot of studies and analyst reports that have been conducted on various kinds of e-governance applications, we notice concerns around access, concerns around inclusion, concerns around representation and voice of different types of social groups that are considered marginal, and that the policymakers and the development planners are more would like to reach more to through adopting information technologies. And there are demands for focus to shift to technology design approaches and methods that align better with the governance ethos of a particular country or region. And with that, with that current state of the art understanding of where e-governance is and where it should be moving, the e-governance sessions at this conference and consultation, we divided into 3 thematic areas. The first one had a focus on citizen access to services and empowerment. And when we refer to access, we are not only looking at availability of physical infrastructure and ownership of digital devices. So it's not restricted to high bandwidth availability or availability of a smartphone or a laptop computer, but it's also the ability of different sections of our society to benefit from the use of these digital services. And therefore, when it comes to looking at these aspects, capacities, entitlements, the kind of applications, and the features that are present within these applications, they become important. Our second session was focused on decision support systems and analytics. With this growing, generation of data, growing generation of digital data all across for various purposes, some sort of a datafication of citizens and governance, methods, mechanisms for digital data sharing for suitable use in decisions concerning public services and other governance functions becomes important. Looking at the emerging artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies, and how do we keep pace with them, and how do we ensure that these technologies are used for the public good and not otherwise, becomes important. And the second session was devoted to discussions around these themes. And then our final session was looking at legal and policy dimensions. And the focus here was on engagement with the regulations pertaining to data security, privacy, use and implications for algorithmic and automated decision-making applications that we increasingly see when it comes to matters of facial recognition, when it comes to matters of, identity systems, etc. We had experts drawn from across the world, just as they were experts in other sessions. We had experts from the United Nations, from our indigenous CDOT, etc., talking about physical infrastructure and affordability of digital infrastructure. We had a very interesting case of Korea, where Dr. Chan was talking about how the digital infrastructure that has been created has been used to engage the public in Korea during the current pandemic, resulting in certain kinds of decision-making processes. We had Dr. Shireen Madom from London School of Economics talking about local practice and its importance in e-governance designs. Dr. Joyjit Pal talking about threats of misinformation in social media platforms, and Anju Mangal and Osama Manzar of the World Wide Web Foundation talking about affordability and meaningful access when it comes to internet for the last 50%, or those who don't have that kind of connection at this point in time. If we were to look at the summary of discussions and key takeaways from this session, these are some of the points that I put together. I understand all these sessions have been recorded, and it is not very easy. It's actually very difficult to capture the essence in such a short time, say in 4 or 5 points. But I'll still attempt. So the discussions did bring about this need of attending to local production capacities and sensibilities if the attempt is to make digital technologies available to a wide range of social groups. So local production capacities need to be attended to, need to be created, and efforts need to be made to ensure software applications, digital devices are produced in local settings, be they be districts, taluks, gram panchayats. There has to be some sort of a capacity created, because it's when their capacities are enhanced and developed, applications that are more suitable to their requirements will get done. There was this discussion around changing design approaches and approaches incorporating flexibility to cater to variations in local practice, and therefore a need to move from rigid plan-driven methods to more agile methods, as we see much more in the industry today. E-governance projects should be evaluated more on positive governance outcomes using criteria such as accountability, equity, and inclusion, and not only on efficiency measured as turnaround times, which we have been using for most part over the last 20 years. State agencies should work towards building trust on data collection, handling data handling practices of the Korean government that allowed them to provide data without any apprehensions during the current pandemic management. There are threats of misinformation on social media platforms. These need to be acknowledged, and suitable, including proactive and continuous engagement with citizens, need to be carried out. And a very interesting example from the Kerala police was cited towards attending to these kinds of aspects. In the second session on decision support systems and analytics, looking at data practices, we had experts from the Indian Institute of Management at Bangalore, Google Research, University of Oslo. We had Gabriel from Thailand and Mr. Mohandas from NIC. And they covered topics ranging from open source to artificial intelligence to cross-sector dialogue and learning when it comes to matters related to leveraging interoperable frameworks across state departments and their computerized setups. The key takeaways from session 2, if I were to list them down, interoperable technical architectures are important. They are important to ensure efficiency in data handling across departments. However, interoperability also requires continued dialogue across organizations, and this need not always be left to computers and computing systems. People need to get involved there. So that continues to remain important. While artificial intelligence can enhance quality of decision support systems, especially when human expertise and availability is a concern, issues of bias and discrimination will have to be explicitly attended to. So ethics, questions of ethics, question of values that get embodied into artificial intelligence attended to if we were to leverage the potential that AI offers to us. Free and open source software should continue, as Kerala has shown, to the country and maybe other regions in the world. It should continue to be encouraged. Free and open source software is another way to bring in more transparency and explainability to the AI and machine learning algorithms that we would want to use more and more when it comes to matters related to healthcare delivery or related to educational learning, and what is being done by the data that is being provided. And in matters of data capture, in matters of data handling, in matters of data use, justice is important, especially because we see an increasing datafication of citizens, and attending to matters of data justice is important to ensure inclusion and equity and preventing harm.
Dr. Prakash, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but if we could wrap up in 2 minutes
Right.
because we are pressed for time.
Sure,
Thank
sure.
you.
This is my last slide. So we had in the last session on legal and policy dimensions, discussion around regulation, discussion around constitutionality, and the matters discussed from the domains of identity management, facial recognition, emotion detection, automated decision making, etc. And those discussions brought out the need for privacy and data protection. There was this consensus that governments have to play an active role in safeguarding privacy and securing and security, and this needs to be done proactively and ex ante and not ex post. And it's not only consent based mechanisms through which this should happen, there should be accountability based frameworks also that government data controllers should put in place. Freedom of speech regulations, such as shutting down the internet or blocking websites, has to be much more transparent, has to attend to issues and matters of procedural justice. And we all ended with this hope that there will be much more public consultations because they are considered useful when it comes to matters related to technology design features and data practices that should be considered essential while we go about our e-governance practices. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Prakash. We did finish on time. Thank you. We now continue with the session that had abruptly got lost earlier. Professor T. Jayaraman has joined us back. He'll be continuing with his report on information technology, and I request you, sir, to please wrap up under 5 minutes. Thank you.
Let me just yes. So we were just I was just trying to move this forward. So we need to build on the successful, I think, thus far example of Coconic. And I think this has, the participant pointed out that this had some very important learning. One is, of course, the need to ensure that your product has quality. Without quality of production, we go nowhere. We need to develop a component ecosystem, and government incentives are a key, especially in the hardware sector. What they are and their scope was not gone into in too much detail, but this is the general sense. It's also important, especially when in this all sectors, in both software and hardware, of course, that you may start local, driven by local markets and demand, but wherever where feasible, but one must constantly think of how to go national and global. Okay, this was emphasized by several experts. What are the new domains in software and hardware? So potential domains for growth in IT solutions, several were listed. Some of them familiar, others perhaps new, like marine sciences, AI and data science applications for SDGs, and there are several others which are on the horizon. In the case of Industry 4.0, as has been referred to, Internet of Things, autonomous robots, additive manufacturing, augmented reality, etc., were some of these things. It was emphasized that there are new opportunities because both major players in the industry as well as the government of India and other stakeholders are anticipating and trying to push new growth in the hardware arena, and this will provide opportunities for Kerala as well. What do we develop what do we focus on? It's not something, how do we choose among this list that we see is not always easy. Very specific and specialized models were discussed of how to go about this. A product development board to identify specific areas was one point of discussion. Specific models of technology development are available from many parts of the world, and there were several interesting presentations, and the details would be communicated in the final report. Of course, there was intense and very active discussion on industry academic linkages already referred to in the summary reports today. So there were, I think I'm going to focus only on the specific. How do we inculcate an innovation culture at the undergraduate level in every degree program? Specific suggestions for courses and syllabi. The importance of teaching knowledge of real-world problems by inviting or incorporating industry professionals in regular engineering education. Promote faculty to go on, promote meaning, facilitate faculty to go on deputation to startups and industry R&D projects. An appropriate balance of real-world problem-oriented research and research programs. And even when there is research which is not obviously applied, encourage all research to indicate potential application. There are a lot of programs of this kind across the world from which we can learn. Skills and employment, and the very important suggestion was to look at skills as a multi-tier skill development story. I'm sure this was echoed elsewhere. Similar, for instance, to the three-tier system of ITIs, polytechnics, engineering graduates, we have a equivalent thing for IT. And this is, it was emphasized, a matter of some urgency. Another gap, of course, in the skills and employment issue is the fact that there is a lack of middle-level management in the IT sector in Kerala. There was some discussion about the ways in which this could be promoted.
I apologize for the interruption, Professor Jayaraman. We will need to wrap up in under 1 minute. We are pressed for time. Thank you.
Yes. So there are new methodologies in software development that allow potential for developing micro applications, etc., that realize new employment opportunities. A number of key policy initiatives have been listed, several of them are facilitation, and it's very important that IT policy is not left static but revised, refurbished, and promoted to industry on a regular basis. There are many pointers to an immediate agenda. Carry forward this momentum, an information exchange portal to promote collaboration and partnership. We urgently need a test lab for hardware, curriculum review and redesign in IT-related areas can be immediate, and the industry academic partnerships can take off sooner than later. And while we, as I end, let me once again, put forward, three slogans which came from our experts, and I think they serve to wrap up. Leverage our strength, set audacious goals, and dream of new frontiers. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And with that, we quickly move on to the next summary on session on modern skill development being presented by Dr. K. Ravi Raman, member of Kerala State Planning Board.
Thanks. Dear fellow participants, our session on modern skill development was very interesting. It was informative and very creative in terms of policy and practice. We had two ministers, T.P. Ramakrishnan and Srimati Shailaja teacher. making their opening remarks. And our Vice Chairperson, V.K. Ramachandran, also made a few remarks on the relevance of this session. He stated that Kerala has the potential to be India's skilled labor hub. He also pointed out that Kerala's strength with respect to school and higher education make it better equipped than most other Indian states to deal with the emerging challenges. The welcome address was given by Dr. Mridul Ipan, my colleague over here. The core part of the session was taken up by excellent presentations on various themes related to skills and employability. Of the 6 papers presented, 3 were on the ILO perspectives on skills, employment, and labor market, presented by experts from the ILO, and the other 3 dealt with country experiences, that is, the best practices in various countries, with a focus on Korea, Germany, and South Asian countries, particularly Bangladesh and India. While Ms. Sukriti Dasgupta, Mr. Srinivas Reddy, and Mr. Gabriel Bordado explored the ILO perspectives, Professor Juho Lee, Mr. Atul Kumar Tiwari, and Mr. Peter Rahman spoke on Korea, India, and Germany respectively. They all made their presentations of high standards. We had 2 discussants, Professor Santosh Mehrotra from JNU and Professor Jimol Uni from Ahmedabad University, offering critical comments and policy suggestions. I have begun my introductory remarks by making the point that this is a time when the future of work debate is at its peak. This is largely because of the very change that has been taking place in the larger context of work and work culture. I have also pointed out that Kerala society is a knowledge society, and the task now is to transform the knowledge society into a knowledge economy, which necessitates identification of skill gaps and acquisition of new age skills. There are several takeaways from this session. I propose to take up only a few. One major takeaway is what Professor Juho Lee has suggested, the high-touch, high-tech, HT approach in education. This implies 2 things. First, a transformation of mass standardization to mass personalized education. And second, the increased application of artificial intelligence as a method of learning. This would obviously involve the combination of deep learning, higher order thinking and its application, and intelligent tutoring through what he calls artificial intelligence tutoring. It is worth noting that Kerala has not yet seriously addressed this role of AI in higher education. I'm not saying that we haven't taken it up, but it's not yet seriously addressed. And this is something that needs attention, particularly at a time when Kerala aims to transform itself into a knowledge economy. Yet another aspect that one should certainly think about is joining the larger network of HT University Consortium of Education Commission Asia, which could be an excellent aggregator for high-tech skilling programs. We certainly need to integrate, or we need to graft ourselves into the larger global network. A significant takeaway is with respect to VET system, vocational education and training system, and the question how best we could reform the VET system of education in the state. The VET system in Germany has drawn praise from the rest of the world. It is time for Kerala to explore the German model of duality in our education system. In Germany, a duality principle is followed in which students work in the factories most days of the week and spend the remaining in classrooms, thereby combining professional knowledge with practice or applications. Mr. Peter Rahman was giving importance to Federal Institute of Vocational Education and Training in Germany and pointed out that they invest heavily in research and innovation. It's a point which was further emphasized by one of the discussants, Professor Santosh Mehrotra, and I think that we need to give emphasis on more resources for research and innovation on skills and programs. We need to strengthen linkages between education institutions and enterprises, an issue which has been discussed heavily, and I understand that in many other sessions also, this point was raised, particularly in the industry section. Well, this is an area which we have already begun. We have taken a few steps towards this, but it requires strengthening with the new forms of governance. Yet another aspect takeaway is with respect to women. Two issues came up basically. First, women should be given utmost priority in skilling towards higher end jobs and should not be confined to traditional or sunset industries alone. This would help them participate in the labor force and empower them economically, and more importantly, help strengthen the care economy, which is in crisis the world over in the time of COVID-19. Second, the very understanding of skilling should go beyond the conventional definition of skills, as it is often conceived in terms of technical, digital, or engineering alone. Instead, it should go on to include various other skills, such as caring skills in particular, which are not often counted as skills in many economies. The observation made by Sukhido Dasgupta that women confront the choice between unemployment and risky jobs is to be taken with utmost importance in a state like Kerala, where we give importance to women and social security measures. Given the fact that female labor force participation is low, it is important that we start a skilling program exclusively dedicated to women. Various categories of skills could be brought under the scheme. We need to know, as in other countries, whether we also miss the middle skills. Equally important aspect is the diverging nature of wage share and labor productivity, part of the global debate that's taking place. Kerala should be able to address the gender divide and digital divide as part of the same problem. We need to bring in intersectionality in this context, a new approach in planning skilling programs. As women entrepreneurship is to be promoted as part of creating rural and urban jobs and improving livelihood options, as emphasized by both Sukhido Dasgupta and Chimoloni, we should think of suggesting Kudumbasri and other such organizations to earmark more funds exclusively for training and skilling of women for the emerging economy activities. It is to be recognized that apart from skilling gaps in terms of skills per se, it also exists in terms of biological and social identities such as caste and gender. This necessitates, as I mentioned earlier, an intersectionality approach while prioritizing skilling programs. The very idea of triple L, lifelong learning paradigm, is yet another takeaway from the conference. Mr. Gabriel Bordado from ILO explained this. Though not something new, the idea was interesting.
I apologize to intervene, Dr. Raman. May I request you to wrap up in under 1 minute? Thank you.
Yeah. The challenge now is to build up state capacity for skilling programs addressed by many scholars, particularly Srinivas Reddy and others. And we need to begin with the skill mapping and the explanation given by Atul Kumar Tiwari and others, particularly with respect to the activities undertaken by the ministry, central government is of importance for us. To conclude, what I wish to say is that we are going to hear Professor Amartya, who introduced us the notion of entitlements, capabilities, and like that. So I would say that the skills should be understood as a flow variable, and we need to incorporate it, we need to upgrade it in our everyday life, in our everyday educational programs. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Raman, for keeping it succinct. We quickly move on to the summary of session on federalism and development financing, being presented by Professor K.J. Joseph, Director of Gulati Institute of Finance and Taxation.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I must say that it was a great privilege for Gulati Institute of Finance and Taxation to join with State Planning Board to organize this particular session on federalism and development financing. And this particular session, its relevance emerged in the context of this international conference on consultation, on Kerala Looks Ahead, emerged in the context wherein there has been a remarkable changes in India's fiscal context, and the debilitating fiscal conditions of the states got further deteriorated because of the COVID-induced economic recession. So in this context, the particular session on federalism and development financing dealt broadly around the following issues that emerged in the context of unfavorable fiscal federal relations and declining fiscal autonomy of the state, and issues that emerged in the context of the manner in which GST has been implemented, and reduced flexibility of the states in the context of FRBM Act, and finally, the relevance of resource mobilization outside budget through special purpose vehicles. State Planning Board, along with the GIFT, lined up a galaxy of eminent scholars to deliberate on this issue, and wherein we had Dr. T.M. Thomas Isaac, Honorable Finance Minister of the state, delivering the inaugural address, and Professor M. Govinda Rao, Honorary Professor at GIFT, chairing the session. The panelists included Professor C.P. Chandrasekhar from Jawaharlal Nehru University, Sri Rajesh Kumar IAS, the Additional Chief Secretary of the Government of Kerala, and Professor D. Narayana, former Director of GIFT, and Professor Pinaki Chakravarti, Director of NIPFP, and Professor Sushil Khanna of IIM Calcutta. And he served as the discussant of the session. I had the privilege of welcoming and setting the issues for the discussion, and on behalf of State Planning Board, Mr. P. Shaji expressed the vote of thanks. Coming to the issue regarding fiscal federal arrangements, the committee generally felt that there's a grave concern. They expressed a grave concern over the growing asymmetric treatment of union versus states. The center had manipulated the taxation system so that the due share of the states in the divisible pool of the country is getting diminished. This in turn leading to reduced fiscal autonomy of the states more than ever before in the recent past. The center is circumventing the recommendation of the finance commissions by introducing cess and surcharges, which are of course not shareable with the states. In 14-15, these cess and surcharges account for just 7.4% of the gross tax revenue, and whereas today it accounts for almost 20% of the gross tax revenue is such cess and surcharges which are not shared. In the absence of declining resource flow from the center and the stringent rules on fiscal deficit, there is no alternative to significant levels of off-budget support from the development of Kerala. Now, coming to GST, the GST was expected. It was expected that it will give a major boost to the tax revenue of the states, but it has been a major setback. The introduction of GST has reduced the buoyancy of the revenue collection of the states and has curtailed the fiscal autonomy of the states further. The GST rates are not at all revenue neutral. The current rates are 30 to 40% lower than pre-GST rates, and this has seriously affected the tax collections. The need of the hour is that the states should be given flexibility in fixing the rates of the GST within a broad band. Further, the share of the states in CGST should be increased to 60%. GST collection efficiency should also, there is scope for improvement in improving the efficiency, and there is a lot needs to be done in terms of fixing the technical issues with the GST-IN network. About revenue and expenditure mechanism, the pandemic has increased the burden of the states, and there is need to protect the migrant workers, and at the same time, there's going to be large-scale migration. Return of the migrants from the Gulf countries, and all these adds to the fiscal burden of the state. The state needs to support them, and financing these activities will be a major challenge. Strategies are now required to increase resource mobilization from limited domain left with the state, particularly in the area of petrol, diesel, liquor, stamp duty, and lotteries, and are also explored, and there is a need to explore the possibility of increasing non-tax revenue collections. The state needs to spend more on infrastructure as they are much at the need of their hour, and it was highlighted that to ensure long-term development of the state, the capital expenditure should be at least of the order of 20 to 25% of the gross state domestic product within the next 5 years, and at present it is only around 2%. For Kerala, the need is to achieve almost 14 to 16% increase in revenue collections, Almost 60% of our borrowing goes for social sector expenditure, and we need to take up this. While achieving the transition to a knowledge economy, Kerala needs a sound strategy of financing its long-term development while continuing the process of social upliftment. The conventional view is that fiscal deficit should be for capital spending, but the relationship between fiscal deficit and gross capital formation is inverse in the Indian context. The last decade, the combined gross fixed deficit is pretty high, of which more than 50% is revenue deficit. So we are borrowing to spend for our current expenditure. If you look at the center and states separately, all states, in all the states, the fiscal deficit is well below the FRBM target, and they don't run huge revenue deficits. Therefore, increasing trend in the central general government of the bulk of the FD is being used for covering revenue deficit is largely because of the central government. Conversely, part of the capital expenditure of the center is channeled to states through centrally sponsored schemes. In the context of growing deficit, extra borrowing is the only option, but the question that merits attention is how much extra borrowing states can make, especially in the context of 15th Finance Commission Award. Now, final issue which the deliberator poses on the development finance institutions, lessons from KIFBI. The development financing is an issue unique to a market economy. In a developing economy, individual investors may not be interested in investing money in long-term projects with low returns. Hence, there was the need of a bond market. If there is no developed bond market, specialized institutions for development financial institutes are needed. India had rich institutions. However, their presence was reduced after the introduction of liberalization in the guise of setting up a level playing field. In the present context of eroding state revenues and limited fiscal autonomy, the states cannot even go to banks for borrowing. Therefore, they are to look for alternative solutions. Hence, off-budget borrowing have emerged as a viable alternative for financing development. Kerala Bank has mobilized 60,000 crore as deposit for, and this would double in next 2 to 3 years' time. Finance is going to play a fundamental role in changing Kerala in the long run. In order to undertake fiscal consolidation and boost the capital expenditure, the state has adopted the innovative mechanism like KIFBI. The panelists have supported KIFBI, and similar SPVs are viable alternative for financing development. KIFBI has a very intricate asset liability management system where borrowing are backed by part of state revenue, like motor vehicle tax and.
May I interrupt for a second and request it?
But in the context of greater centralization of power, one of the ways to mobilize resources is to make state-owned public sector units vibrant and more profitable. Since Kerala has a large presence of state-owned public sector undertakings, a few thousand crores could be squeezed from such their profit. Center has huge scope for infrastructure. Okay, now I think to make the public sector undertakings vibrant, there is a need to improve governance of state-owned public sector undertakings. Kerala, drawing from Kerala's success in decentralized healthcare governance, the PSUs in Kerala could introduce governance reforms by way of creating more responsible and professional boards. So on the whole, the panel made the case for drastic change in the existing center-state relations, reforms in the GST system, and of course, finding ways and innovative ways of own resources, and especially our public sector undertakings. Thank you very much.
Apologies for rushing you, sir, and thank you for that summary. We quickly move on to the summary of session on tourism by Engineer Joy NR, Chief of I&I Division, State Planning Board.
Respected chair of this session, distinguished speakers and officials. As part of the international conference, the tourism session was held from 2 p.m. on February 2nd, 2021. And the session started with the welcome address by Dr. V. Venu, IAS, who was also the chair of this session. The growing influence of tourism sector as an economic powerhouse and its potential as a tool for development are undeniable. The role of government in tourism development has to be that of a catalyst rather than a regulator. And this requires synergy and convergence with different stakeholders. And in the recent past, the tourism sector has faced a crisis due to COVID-19 pandemic, and the earnings in the sector, the loss is in the range of 20,000 crore to 25,000 crore over the time of last 10 months. And the session focused on future of tourism in Kerala, tourism marketing, as well as responsible tourism. And in his welcome address, the chair pointed out some of the biggest challenges the tourism industry is facing in the post-COVID scenario, with the several enterprises closed and thousands becoming jobless. And the chair expected new opportunities in the sector will come with the end of the pandemic. And in the opening remarks by the Honorable Minister for Tourism, Shri Kadakampalli Surendran, Kerala has made a mark in global scenario and served as a model for other states in India. He pointed out that 10% of the GDP of tourism is part of this state GDP, and it employs around 15 lakh people in the sector. And he highlighted the responsible tourism initiatives and the benefits it has brought to the community. And the current tourism policy focuses on adventure tourism, promotion of Malabar and river cruise tourism, Kochi Binale, and heritage tourism. And the first speaker of the session was Dr. Suman Billa, IAS, Director, Technical Cooperation and Silk Board, UNWTO, Madrid. And he noted that the main advantages of Kerala being authentic tourism products and experiences based on consumer trends and changes. And Kerala is a leader in Ayurvedic and holistic healthcare, and houseboats and their self-isolating nature, and the less crowded destinations which is suitable for social distancing, and homestays, but this needs to work on international health protocols. And second speaker was Ms. Christina Beckman, Vice President, Global Strategy for Adventure Travel Trade Association and co-founder, Tomorrow's Airlook, who took up the topic, Future of Active Holidays, particularly for destinations like Kerala. She pointed out that adventure-intensive, experience-based and cultural explorations are the key factors of Kerala. Ms. Christina also put forward that excellent world-class training should be given in skill development with a global perspective, and all forms of tourism, especially heritage and spice tourism, are required to be promoted with responsibility. Then Professor Nibid Rajan Chowdhury, Head of the Department of Tourism and Hospitality Management, Jamia Millia Islamia, explained the role of effective tourism marketing in the post-COVID scenario. He explained two factors like qualifying and vantage factors with a tactical approach in health and hygiene. He also noted shifting from destination attractiveness to travel motivation. Again, Dr. Harold Goodwin, Founder Director, International Center for Responsible Tourism, UK, briefed responsible tourism initiatives of Kerala. He appreciated Kerala as a leader of responsible tourism initiatives in tackling over-tourism, in maximizing local economic development and promoting inclusive growth. Mr. Deepak Deva, MD, Travel Corporation of India, spoke on the future of tourism in Kerala. He said, the earlier bed and breakfast should be replaced by bed and experience, where tourists should carry a great experience followed by inclusive tourism. And new destinations should be created and mention new possibilities like honeymoon tourism, Fort Cochin Jazz Festival, etc. And I said, way forward, based on the lessons from the session, one, authentic tourism products and experiences which are innovative, digital marketing and online travel platform, Kerala's Spice Tour initiative, intensive, experience-based and cultural explorations, a shift from destination attraction to travel motivation, responsible tourism for tackling over-tourism and maximizing local economic development, translate new thoughts, ideas in tourism sector on a top-down approach. And the session was a learning curve for the tourism sector, and SPB and tourism department will pick up valuable inputs of the conference and take it forward for creating more products and income in the sector. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Engineer Joy NR. That was the summary of session on tourism that we just listened to. We have just 2 more reports to go before we move on to the big address that possibly all of you are looking forward to. All the participants in this conference are definitely looking forward to the address by Nobel laureate in economic sciences and university professor of Harvard University, Professor Amartya Sen. So we just wanted to let you know that we have about 15 more minutes to go for that. So if there's anybody who logged off or any of that sort, please do come back and join us. Meanwhile, we have 2 more summaries. The first one is on higher education, being presented by Dr. Bindu P. Varghese, Chief of Social Services Division, the Kerala State Planning Board.
Good afternoon to all. The session on higher education was really resourceful and insightful. The session was inaugurated by Minister for Higher Education, Dr. K.T. Jalil, and chaired by Dr. Rajan Gurukal, the Vice Chairperson of Kerala State Higher Education Council. And Dr. B. Iqbal, Member State Planning Board, welcomed the gathering. 7 papers were presented on various subjects by experts from various fields. Now I am presenting a brief of this, the highlights of these presentations. Dr. Rajan Gurukal stressed the need for attainment of excellence in higher education. We must strengthen our academic practices by bureaucratizing and decentralizing higher education institutions to ensure the institutional environment of quality teaching and learning, enabling teachers and students to maximize their academic ingenuity. This effort of genuine and committed involvement alone can enhance quality and standards. This alone can lead our universities eligible for international collaboration in the field of research in emerging areas. We can be participants in knowledge economy only if our universities and research institutions generate exchangeable intellectual property. Professor Gopinath Ravindran mainly focused on curricular innovations, and he shared his practical observations about Kerala's university system. He suggested a radical change necessary to elevate the status of higher education in Kerala to match the global standards. A new network culture with all stakeholders collectively putting in efforts is very much required. Professor Gopinath also expressed his reservations on massive open online courses. Teachers are increasingly being pressurized to offer MOOC courses in a big way across universities. While MOOC may be inevitable in the future courses of education, we should also work to making it a better system. Professor explained the various dimensions of curriculum in higher education. He opined that the performance of research institutions, the state will be critically evaluated. He also said that the social sciences disciplines are not given adequate importance in Kerala higher education, and fundamental research is neglected, and the thrust is on applied research. Kerala has to follow more equitable and socially inclusive policies in higher education. Professor Ronald Herring from Cornell University talked about the advantages and disadvantages of online education and pointed out the deficiency of teachers can be solved by online courses. While definitely limiting in terms of the interactions, MOOCs nevertheless allow people from a large number of countries to access the courses, as also providing strong feedbacks. The kind of precision and documentation possible in MOOCs can never parallel what we see in conventional lectures. On the downside, however, it requires a large resources and time. We will have to go for more blended courses combining traditional teaching learning with online education. Professor N.V. Varghese stressed on institutional innovations. He explained the transformation of education pattern from 1980s to 2010. He also mentioned the national education policy and universalization of higher education by the 2035. He said 1980s, Kerala higher education is turning more towards self-financing mode of education. There is parental pressure for more courses with employability potential and skill-based training. Many students are leaving for other states hoping for better job-oriented courses. The quality of education in the self-financing institutions is far below that of public institutions. The higher education institutions are suffering from lack of enough funds even to pay the salaries. The role of state in higher education should be redefined, and Kerala can be an educational hub for the country if we allow appropriate policies in higher education institutions should be given more autonomy and funding resources should be diversified. Professor Shambi Menon also talked about institutions. He shared his critical remarks on the basis of his own experience of guiding Ambedkar University, Delhi in its initial 10 years. He said that universities should be institutions of self-governing and aspiring practitioners. The public universities' dependence on state funding should not exceed 50%, and the fee collected from students should not exceed 20%. The remaining 30% shall be made through consultancies, project work, publication royalties, etc. Autonomy is to be given by self-governing committee of experts and aspirant practitioners. Multi- and interdisciplinary courses should be introduced. Universities should not be treated as government departments. Professor Daniel Little, University of Michigan, spoke about the significance of international collaboration should be nurtured between faculty to faculty. Universities are highly decentralized in US. Scope for collaborative research in poverty alleviation, public health. And with regards to the discipline of economics, he is of the view that US academicians are more conservative with regard to their Indian counterparts. Professor Devika Madalli from Indian Statistical Institutes made a presentation on the topic, Libraries Ahead, Innovation in Library and Information Science. During her talk, she explained the history of library movements. She also narrated online platforms of library like Inflibit, National Digital Library, etc. She also made recommendations in the upgradation of libraries in the present scenario. Professor Sukhdev Thorat talked about the issues of strengthening the socially inclusive character of higher education. Dr. Thorat pointed out the predominance of self-financing institutions in Kerala that results in the violation of equity principles. Economic and social disparities still persist in Kerala based on income and community. He suggested that Kerala should have a specific policy to address the educational backwardness of SC population. Dr. Sudhir, Vice President of KCSTA, responded to the presentation and said that there should be a link between higher education institutions and research institutions in Kerala. These papers, in general, point out the problems faced by higher education in sector in Kerala while highlighting the immense possibilities in front of the state. And a large number of comments from delegates have come during and after the session. And the comments were focused on the need for curricular reformation and the deficiency of the state to equip our students at an international level, and the areas to be focused to resolve the problems, etc. I'm sure that all these points can be better inputs while formulating and implementing the higher education policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bindu. And we quickly move on to the last summary on session on local self-governments. Ms. Josephine J., Chief of Decentralized Planning Division, Kerala State Planning Board.
Respected Chair, respected speakers and participants. Kerala, a densely populated state with vibrant social movements and civil society initiatives, stands tall in various human development indicators. The major catalyst for this achievement is the state-initiated process of democratic decentralization by devolving power and finances. The decentralized three-tier system, with village as the last tier, is governed with representation of women and marginalized communities. The People's Plan campaign further strengthened the three-tier decentralized system. The public participation in governance has deepened the understanding of public wealth and distribution of public goods among the population. Local governments played a key role in containing as well as tackling COVID-19 pandemic. But Unanticipated expenditure for crisis management is a great challenge for local governments whose revenue raising capacity is limited. To mitigate the impact of frequent natural disaster and climatic variation, and to improve the disaster preparedness, for the first time in the country, the local governments in Kerala have prepared the disaster management plan during 2020, and this is one of its kind in the country. And the department was revived and strengthened by integrating the local self-government, various departments into the integrated local self-government department. Not only that, for better service delivery to the people, the integrated local governance management system, a comprehensive software developed by the IKM, has been deployed in all local bodies. Now, our approach paper, 13th plan approach paper, stressed on local governments in Kerala would be raised at par to the ISO standards, and we could materialize that. Now, the local government places special emphasis on the issues arising due to rapid urbanization in Kerala. It recognizes the importance of developing appropriate strategies and programs for coping up with challenges and opportunities thrown up by the process of urban growth. And I am mentioning the programs and actions of Kudumbashree Mission, which played a role in the socio-economic development of the state. And the 4 missions of the incumbent government functions as strong pillars for decentralized development of the state. And another mentioning is Subiksha Kerala. Subiksha Kerala is an ambitious scheme started by the state government in 2021 to combat food scarcity against the backdrop of COVID-19 pandemic. Now, I am coming to the summary of the conclaves of local governments. And the conclave was motivational as it ascertained the strength of decentralized governance in Kerala. The sessions were enriched with creative and thought-provoking discussions. Our Honorable Minister A.C. Moideen addressed the session in his opening remarks. The session on best practices by local bodies, organized by Kerala's Institute of Local Administration, KILA, showcased the ability and focus of decentralized governance in Kerala. The session also discussed the major challenges faced and the innovative solution to the challenges. Session confirms the set goal of local bodies towards sustainable inclusive development. The second session was graced with renowned academicians and experts from around the globe. The session was chaired by Sharada Muralidharan IAS, Additional Chief Secretary to Local Self-Government Department. Honorable Vice Chairperson Dr. V.K. Ramachandran addressed the session. And the guidance and support of Dr. K.N. Harilal, our Honorable Member of Kerala State Planning Board, also enriched the session. Their reflections created fresh outlook towards the functioning and structuring of the 3-tier decentralized system. Professor Prabhat Patnaik, with his immense experience with the subject and the state, has suggested the need of futuristic planning of decentralized governance. He also discussed the socialist aspects of decentralized governance and need of increased state investment in local bodies and the need for local bodies to develop into production units. Professor Patrick Heller opined the need of strengthening local bodies in urban cities with public participation. He was of the opinion that the urban issues are not much highlighted anywhere as they deserve. He focused on service delivery and pointed out that there is significant variation in the capacities of cities to growth and inclusion. Professor Harry Blair reflected his insights of democratization of decentralized governance in global context. Dr. S.S. Meenakshi Sundaram expressed his views in the importance of decentralized disaster management. Dr. Aruna Roy, in a presentation, appreciated the functioning and structuring of decentralized governance in the state. She also warned about the need of resistance to any move towards centralization of governance. Vijayanand sir emphasized on the importance of ensuring social justice in decentralization of state funding. He suggested the need of strengthening the involvement of local bodies in the development of marginalized communities, especially SC, ST and fisher folk. Dr. Devika, in her presentation, opined the need for gender-inclusive development and suggested the creation of awareness for eco-friendly development. And we should say that there exist gaps in urbanization, in equity and inclusion, and also in governance. I conclude. Now, I thank the chair and all the speakers for their valuable insights on local governance. Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am. That brings us to the end of the summary reports on the 9 thematic sessions. And without any further ado, we present to you Nobel laureate, Professor Amartya Sen.
Well, it's wonderful to have the opportunity to talk about Kerala Looks Ahead. It's rather nostalgic for me also, because when I came back to India after having been in England for a while, this was not long after Kerala has had a new government. The Communist Party had won an election in 1957, and from the beginning of 63 onwards, I was teaching there in Delhi School of Economics, and Kerala was announcing some different plans about looking ahead, particularly focusing on the quality of human labor, with kind of ancestry that goes back to Adam Smith in particular, but also to Karl Marx, and this big thing about how to judge the productive potential of an economy. We're focusing on the quality of labor. Morris Dow, who was my teacher in Cambridge, was particularly keen on that. So Kerala Looks Ahead, long time ago. Kerala was one of the 3 poorest economies in India at that time. And there was a question, I had some differences of opinion within the Delhi school, whether Kerala can afford to have education for all, healthcare for all, social security for all, given the fact it was so very poor. And of course, it overlooked many factors, including the fact that being poor means that its labor cost was also rather low, and that on one hand, you needed to spend more, but the spending is moderated by the fact that the wages were lower in Kerala. I'm talking about all that because I was then told that Kerala won't succeed. Well, then it so happened that within a couple of decades, Kerala had not only moved away from that position, it was competing for being one of the top 3 rather than the bottom 3 in terms of per capita expenditure, which is the figure, which is the subject on which we have more data, but comes to per capita income, in fact. And then for a while, of course, Kerala became also the richest state in India in terms of per capita income. So what was happening there? There's a historical interest in this because the labor theory of value, which is often being criticized on grounds that, labor is only one factor of production, there are many others. But as Morris Dow argues that there is a certain role of labor which cannot be replaced by anything else, and which actually can generate potential for expansion that nothing else can. But if you look at the practical ancestry, I think probably the earliest credit that we ought to give here has to be given to Japan. In the mid-19th century, when Kerala not with Japan, had the Meiji Restoration, and it was ready to race ahead. Its big focus was going to be education for all. As Mr. Tadeuchi, one of the great Japanese commentators, said, why is it that Americans have higher productivity than we Japanese have? The reason is, he explained, is that the Japanese are already, Americans are all educated, which wasn't quite true, but at least more true than it would have been for most countries in the world, whereas the Japanese were not. So they decided that within 40 years or so, they become fully literate, and they did. And then gradually they covered healthcare for all and so on. So it's not only a Marxian way of thinking, though the Marxian thinking is very strong in this, but the Japanese, which had always differed a little from standard theory, they were ready to go in that direction. Now, the question is, to what extent can Kerala look ahead, continuing the approach of focusing on humanity rather than physical capital accumulation, which of course must be important. And it was important even in theory. It's important in Marxian writing, it's important in Ricardian writing and so on. And of course, it is very much important in neoclassical economic theory. But the role of labor, which is very central to that, and scale of production, and training, and learning, and generally skill formation, whether by education or by practice, is really quite central to an understanding of economics. But I would say that the possibility of expansion here remains very strong. Now, this is partly because the mindset that focuses on humanity as opposed to physical assets is something that's been well established in Kerala. There's an ancestral history going even earlier than the period which I started, namely the communist government coming to office in 1957. But there was a discussion of that both in the labor movement and the untouchability movement in Kerala, whereby education was going to be the means of progress. Similarly, there was discussion in the missionary educational focus. We have to take a broad approach and see what are the different tributaries to that force that developed in Kerala. And I think missionaries clearly played a role there too. And so did the royalties, both in the two native states that formed the state of Kerala. You have to bear in mind that India emerged with 13% education at the time when the British left. Kerala was the exception. It came almost close to 50%, but it needed it to get to 100%. But in some ways, one could argue that 50 to 100% is easier than 13 to 50%, because there is a tradition, there is an attempt to understand how to proceed. And this was a very big part of what happened in Kerala. Now, when we look at the successes and failures today, this focus on labor has to be seen as being really very important, because of the fact that nothing is as important productively as what happened to the attitude of human beings to change, to progress. if we take a different kind of history, say Germany or Japan after the war, they're flattened. Germany had carpet bombing, Dresden and Hamburg and so on, were reduced to rubble. But then, rapidly, with a short period, they were performing at a very high level. And why is that? Because in some ways the focus was on to recreate the atmosphere of productivity, of course with terrible political theory that went in Germany during and before the war. But there was this desire and conviction that you can make use of human labor and go straight ahead. And to a great extent, the same could be true, or same could be said about Japan. So I would say that the successful use of humanity, the concentration on human reasoning, the particular focus on public discussion, whereby we learn from each other, and if there's a disagreement, we criticize each other for it. These are features that have been part of the Kerala's economic strategy. This is not so much the standard economist fare about whether you get to one kind of industry or another, agriculture or manufacturing or larger scale or smaller scale. These are all important, but they're subsumed by the role of human reasoning, human thinking, and then ultimately human practice based on the formation of skill coming both from schooling and from practice and from discussion. So I would say that I would be personally very optimistic about the Kerala looking to the future, but optimistic not just because it has been successful in the past, but we can also understand why it has been successful. What is it that made it different? I was fortunate when I was in these early days in Delhi, when I was arguing with my colleagues in the Delhi School of Economics that Kerala could be a world beater, when I was being told that I was being blinded by a political prejudice. That proved to be not the case. But I was also had the opportunity of talking with people who were great leaders. And I have to say now that in India, the left seems to be in sort of a good, better word, I have to say, doldrums. And it's nice to find people whose minds are open. I had the good fortune of talking with Namu Dvipad a lot. He lives not very far away where I was living in my first year. And I had the fortune of getting together with him a number of times and shared what his thinking were and what the questions were. And I think there is, in my judgment, no substitute to an inquiring mind, a mind that has, as Rabindranath Tagore said, that has not been blocked off. The free flows have been choked. In Kerala, the free flow has not been choked, and I hope it will not be choked. But in order to pursue the future with the same success and more than in the past, what it needs is to keep the mind open, to ask the question again and again, are we doing the right thing? And this reliance on humanity, reliance on reasoning, and reliance on public discussion are central assets which I think Kerala will have use for in the future. So I wish I could be in Kerala at this time rather than sitting amid snow in Boston. But life is like that. But someday I will have a chance again to get back and have those delicious food and those great conversations.
Thank you, sir, for that marvelous address unraveling the history of Kerala in looking ahead. Thank you so much, and we hope to have you in person soon. I now invite Honorable Chief Minister of Kerala, Shri Pinarayi Vijayan, to deliver the concluding remarks.
Distinguished Speaker, Professor Amartya Sen, Vice Chairperson of Kerala State Planning Board, Professor Ramayendran, members of the Kerala State Planning Board, delegates, officers, and dear friends. The three-day international conference and consultation titled Kerala Looks Ahead comes to a culmination today. The conference saw very interesting discussions and deliberations in certain key areas that are crucial for Kerala's economic future. I have been informed that the sessions in the conference have gone into considerable detail. There were intense discussions in 9 themes running in parallel sessions. The conference has served 2 purposes. First, it has stimulated national and international discussion between scholars and experts in the areas that were part of the conference. We hope that this contact and discussions will continue. Second, many suggestions have emerged from the conference. There are issues of long-term and strategic interest to the state, and also recommendations regarding policies that can be implemented in the short run. These suggestions, which have come from all over the world, are of particular interest to us. We will study them carefully and look at how they can be incorporated into policy. I am very glad that this conference was a great success. We got an overwhelming response from experts from different parts of the world. We thank all the distinguished scholars and experts who contributed to the success of the conference. With these words, I conclude the international conference and consultation titled Kerala Looks Ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your words and for the leadership that has made this program possible. And with that, we come to the close of this event, Kerala Looks Ahead. Meanwhile, we keep learning. Thank you.